Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I think before we seek to establish new bureaucracies or before we seek to make substantial changes to our law enforcement structure, we should, of course, have a problem that we need to act upon. We should have evidence that there is an issue before we go about spending lots of money, before we go about replicating processes that are already in place, and most importantly, before we go about reducing the normal law enforcement practices that exist in this country and the restrictions that are placed around them. And I didn't catch all of Senator Rhiannon's contribution, but I just do not see that corruption problem here in this country at a federal level. Yes, there has been high-profile issues at state governments, and yes, those issues have involved people and members from all political parties, but we have not had that evidence presented at a federal level, and we should have that in view if we are going to make a decision of this significance. Indeed, we should take some pride in this country that we are ranked very highly in the world for our lack of corruption. Transparency International, I believe, is one of the more renowned bodies in this field that assesses these issues, and Australia is ranked 9th out of 177 countries that they assess on corruption issues. So we're very, very highly ranked throughout the world on these issues. We are equal with Canada on that table. We're above many advanced economies such as Germany, the United Kingdom, France and the United States. So again, there's not evidence here that there is a great problem with corruption in our government or in our bureaucracies. There was also more evidence provided in a World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report for 2013-14. That report asked businesses who do business in Australia what are the things that limit them from acting or from conducting their business in a free and open way, and corruption was listed by those businesses as equal last in terms of the issues that they face. It was equal last with crime and theft, and corruption was mentioned only by just 0.5% of those surveyed. Some of the other issues which are quite interesting here in this regard that are much more significant include restrictive labour regulations. That was mentioned by 17.3% of businesses in this World Economic Forum survey as a barrier to doing business, and 13.4% suggested inefficient government bureaucracy. Now, I think the proposal here from the Greens is just about creating more bureaucracy, and to the extent that our current bureaucracies are not living up to the best practice or best standards, we should surely be focused on making sure that happens first before we go about creating new bureaucracies. I note for interest that businesses also, 13.3% of businesses mentioned tax rates, which fortunately this government has helped to get down. And I know, although I know my colleague Senator McGrath does want to increase some of those tax rates, but I think to reduce other taxes. Yes, that's true. Sorry, Senator McGrath, he was going to get rid of other taxes. And regulations as well, as mentioned by 11.4% of people. And I spoke yesterday in the chamber about the government's focus on reducing red tape and regulation. So we're going about tackling those issues first, which are most keenly felt by businesses, and that should, of course, be our approach. We also, in saying all of that, of course, we don't get to that result without taking the issue of corruption very seriously, Mr Acting Deputy President. There is no doubt there's still a risk of that occurring wherever there are funds spent and other people are looking after other people's monies, and there are decisions made which help people make money. It's a very important risk that we must always be wary of, and the government has a zero-tolerance approach for corruption, and we have bodies in place already to try to root that out. The primary body we have at the federal level is the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity, and it works with the Australian Crime Commission, the Australian Customs and Border Protection and the Australian Federal Police to make sure that corruption doesn't exist in those organisations. And most importantly, that multi-agency approach has helped keep our our governance relatively clean and at those higher standards across the world. What is really important to note, though, is that the Australian government is strengthening those protections, and decisions made by this government and the previous government have helped to do that. Last year we expanded the jurisdiction of the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity to cover AUSTRAC, CrimTrack and certain aspects of the Department of Agriculture. The government is also investing a further $1 million into that organisation, that is into the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity, to help it stamp out corruption at Australia's borders. And there has been some incidents there on our borders in regards to corruption. Last year there was an arrest of an AFP officer in July following a 15-month investigation between the AFP and the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity. Now, that particular officer has been charged with corruption-related offences. So there is that ability to enforce the law, and the law is being enforced right now with actual charges. And I might come back to later, if I have time, talk about that. That is one of the key things we need here, is that people are actually brought to a court of law and charged, which doesn't always happen at the state level with their various bodies. The government is further, on the 31st of July this year, the Australian government has added to the strength of this structure by formally establishing the Fraud and Anti-Corruption Centre, and that's to be located in the AFP headquarters. The FACT Centre will deliver a whole-of-government fraud investigations training process to the AFP, and the FACT brings together various government organisations in this area that are exposed to these issues, including the Australian Taxation Office, the Australian Investment and Security Commission, the Australian Crime Commission, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service and the Department of Immigration. All of those bodies are being covered by this process, by this training, by this new centre. The centre will maintain a coordinated specialist cell that will collect, analyse and disseminate data from Commonwealth partners and engage with existing local intelligence initiatives and work with financial intelligence agencies to assess, prioritise and respond to serious fraud and corruption matters. Further to all of these announcements, the Commonwealth recently announced a Task Force Pharos, I think it was the previous government, which will target corruption in the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service. This government has also established the Royal Commission into Trade Union Governance and Corruption, which is currently underway. So all of these matters are being dealt with at the moment at the federal level, and as I said to begin my remarks, there doesn't seem to be that evidence at the federal level of a problem, and we'd need that evidence of a problem before we'd have a response, or that should at least be the logical way we make policy, the evidence-based way we make policy. Now, I did note in Senator Rhiannon's remarks that she said that we needed more teeth. We needed more teeth in our law enforcement agencies to tackle corruption. Now, of course, more teeth in this case does mean that we would be weakening certain liberties and rights that people have when they are faced with a charge or when they appear before a law enforcement body, because how it works with ICAC, with the Crime and Corruption Commission in Queensland, where I'm from, those bodies have additional powers granted to them from their state parliaments to enforce the law and to try to expose corruption. Now, I do note, though, that any time that we as a parliament would seek to weaken those protections for people from the state, from investigation from state officials, we should be very careful before we do that. It's a very serious matter to do such things, and right now this parliament is considering such measures in the various national security bills that are before this parliament. We are strengthening the arm of the law to investigate very serious offences relating to terrorism, and that is a matter that we should consider very carefully, and we are doing that. These reforms have come out of various inquiries done by parliamentary committees. I note the Labor Party's bipartisan support for these processes, and we're also sending the bills itself to committees here in this chamber, in joint committees, to evaluate, to make sure that those extra teeth, so to speak, for the law enforcement bodies relating to terrorism are justified. Now, I'd like to just note that the one part of politics here that are not supporting those particular changes is the Greens. They have the major concerns about those changes, and that's fair and reasonable for them to have those concerns, and they should be considered. But here they seem to be haphazardly wanting to increase the teeth, increase the power of the state over the individual, make it so that they have coercive powers, but on that other front, to deal with terrorism, they reject out of hand that approach. And I just note that that is quite ironic, Mr Acting Deputy President, and if their approach to terrorism was applied in the same manner to the issues of corruption, they may not have such jump for these more police powers as they are currently doing. I just never really thought I'd see the day where the Greens would be the ones pushing for stronger powers for police, because this is effectively what this proposal here today advocates. And why I am concerned about that is because the powers that exist in those state bodies do a number of things. The most important power that both ICAC and the CCC in Queensland, formerly the Crime Misconduct Commission, I know less about the Victorian body that's recently been established, but in those two bodies in Queensland and New South Wales, they have the power to both compel a witness to appear before their tribunal and to make them answer questions. They cannot, in the American vernacular and our popular culture vernacular, take the fifth. They cannot refuse to answer questions under oath. They are put under oath as a witness, and they must answer truthfully those questions. They do not have the right to not answer the questions. Now, that is a particularly egregious power, or a particularly severe power, because, of course, if you are in a position to incriminate yourself when you instead mislead such bodies, you will then be guilty of the offence of perjury. So people are put in a corner, and they are not given the normal rights that we provide to witnesses that have been an established fact of our common law since the Middle Ages in England. Now, these powers are akin to the Star Chambers that were set up by various kings of England at different times. At times to expose the great crime of being a Catholic, of being a Papist, and supporting the Pope in Rome. They were enforced there to make sure that people had to answer questions on their various religious beliefs. But fortunately, over time, as parliamentary democracy emerged in England, they were removed, and it became enshrined as part of our common law that you would not be compelled to incriminate yourself in a court of law under oath. But these bodies do away with those principles, and as I say, sometimes that can be justified, but we must be very careful and walk very carefully before we do such a thing. I'd like to note that both those state government bodies, both ICAC and the Crime and Corruption Commission now, in Queensland, both emerged from specific, very serious allegations, or not just allegations, but very serious examples of corruption in those states. In Queensland, of course, the CMC, the body that was before, the precursor to the CCC, was created in response to the Fitzgerald inquiry in the 1980s. And there were serious issues of corruption involved there, and that involved a political party that I'm now a member of. And that political party, the National Party government, or the coalition government, at the time established the Fitzgerald inquiry. Established the CMC in response to the Fitzgerald inquiry. But it should be noted, it sort of get lost in history, but I've looked at this for this contribution, that the Fitzgerald inquiry did not actually recommend the establishment of the CMC, while it was a very, of course, hard-hitting inquiry into the allegations of corruption in the then Queensland government. It did not itself recommend the establishment of a standing body to look into corruption. It did look at that matter, but it concluded that it would be an abuse of the state's power to establish an ongoing body, that instead the state should set up bodies in response to specific issues, which is always, of course, the right of parliaments through various royal commissions or other corruption inquiries. But notwithstanding that recommendation, that body was created, and it has lasted the test of time now. The Queensland Government has made various reforms to it recently in response to some, in the first case, in response to some very serious lapses of protocol on behalf of the CMC, where certain evidence was released publicly, inadvertently, and also the probably, in my view, the vexatious and frivolous use of that body to air politically inspired charges. Likewise, ICAC itself was created also by a coalition government in the late 1980s, around the same time. I'm not sure which one was first, but it was an election promised by the then Leader of the Opposition of the Liberal Party of New South Wales, Nick Greiner, and when he became Premier and established this body, he did mention that in recent, a quote from Nick Greiner, "In recent years in New South Wales, we have seen a Minister of the Crown jailed for bribery, an inquiry into a second and indeed a third, a former Minister for alleged corruption, the former Chief Stipendiary Magistrate jailed for perverting the course of justice, a former Commissioner of Police in the courts on a criminal charge, the former Deputy Commissioner of Police charged with bribery, a series of investigations and court cases involving judicial figures, including a High Court judge, and a disturbing number of dismissals, retirements and convictions of senior police officers." Now, I read that out just to remind, I think, everyone that what we've seen in the last couple of years in New South Wales is not necessarily unprecedented. It has happened before, it is regrettable, and it must be dealt with appropriately. But these things from time to time do happen, even in a relatively clean country in regards to corruption as Australia. And there are various bodies at state level to deal with these issues. Of course, the Premier of New South Wales, Nick Greiner himself, eventually fall foul of an ICAC investigation, and there are various opinions on whether that was right or wrong. I was a little bit young to comment on it and don't know enough, but I think there's a lot of considered opinion out there that he was a very good Premier of New South Wales and he was subsequently cleared of any wrongdoing. Notwithstanding that fact, the political damage caused by an ICAC inquiry caused him to stand down and for New South Wales to perhaps lose a very good Premier. And that brings me back then to the point I made at the start of this contribution, that there are always risks in establishing new investigative bodies like this. We should, of course, not pretend that such bodies themselves cannot ever make mistakes or be subject to their own errors or particular biases and lapse into practices which perhaps aren't maintaining the best standards. So I would be concerned if we were to jump to the establishment of such a body in an environment such as we're in at the moment, which is a charged environment following the particular instances in New South Wales, New South Wales, and also in an environment where there has not been any detailed allegations of serious wrongdoing at a federal level. I do note that in 2012 we did look at this as a parliament before I was here, Mr Acting Deputy President. Sorry, in 2011, the Parliamentary Joint Committee on the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity did look at whether or not such a body should be established federally. They recommended the government should look at it, and the then Labor government did respond to that inquiry, to that inquiry's recommendations, and they did say, and I quote, that the government's approach to preventing corruption is based on the premise that no single body should be responsible. Instead, a strong constitutional foundation, the separation of powers and the rule of law is enhanced by a range of bodies and government initiatives that promote accountability and transparency. This distribution of responsibility creates a strong system of checks and balances. And I support that statement from the former Labor government. I believe we do have a strong system of checks and balances federally, and part of those checks and balances, of course, is this place here, right here, which I stand in right now. This is a check and a balance on the executive government. This chamber is not run or dominated by government members. We have a record number of crossbenchers. It is a place, it is its own ruler, this particular chamber, and it always has the power to investigate into any issue that relates to government, but of course, in particular, those that may relate to serious offences of corruption. I believe that this chamber over time has done a good job at doing that and in playing its role as a check. I don't see any major limitation on the powers of this body, the Senate, to carry out that role. I do not see the need at this stage for an additional bureaucracy at the federal government level, but we should, of course, seek to improve and maintain the anti-corruption bodies and agencies we have here in Canberra.